Climate change threatens the very survival of Africa's indigenous peoples. In East Africa, a radical drought blamed on climate change is battering nomadic pastoralists, forest hunters, and fisher people, and destroying the ecosystems on which they depend. In Kenya, wildlife and livestock are dying of thirst and hunger on an unprecedented scale, and an estimated 6.5 million Kenyans today face starvation. The Indigenous Peoples of Africa Co-ordinating Committee asked our crew to check out how Indigenous communities are coping on the ground in remote parts of Kenya. In northern Kenya, Samburu Chief George LEMERKETO walked us through his devastated territory.
It's dying because of the drought. There's no grass, nothing to eat, no water. We don't have any other bank account. These are our bank accounts. If a cow dies, then you definitely know that you have lost part of your life. And now we have problem. It's about 40 years we have never seen something like this one. And cows are fighting in survival. They don't have even leaves or pods of any tree. All trees are drying up. Maybe it's part of the global warming.
The African Commission on Human and People's Rights recognizes forest-based hunter-gatherers, traditional fisher people, and nomadic pastoralists as indigenous peoples in Africa. These cultures are deeply vulnerable to climate change because they depend on natural resources for food, medicine, and grazing, and don't have the security of land tenure to use as collateral when drought kills their livestock. But African indigenous cultures are also treasure houses of ecological knowledge, and indigenous peoples know a great deal about adaptation and conservation. African indigenous delegates met at an IPACC climate change workshop in Kenya to strategize their responses to global warming. They discussed RED, the UN program on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. RED focuses on carbon credit trading, whereby the industrialized nations responsible for global warming pay developing countries to conserve their forest biodiversity.
Climate change basically involves adaptation and mitigation. It's very important for people, indigenous communities, to meet and brainstorm on how to develop effective and achievable mitigation and adaptation practices or targets.
RED will help us to control the community will have access to control the environment. But we want this one to go to extend it to a grassroots, whereby the community will learn for themselves also.
We want to tell the world that without rights, there should be no RED. Things like land ownership must be very clear there. Who will own the carbon? Who will own the trees that store that carbon? But we are encouraged with what is happening through the UN RED process and through the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility process. At least we see an effort being made to bring communities into the program.
We want to lead Kenyans in conserving the environment, so that in the next few years, the government will entrust forest to communities.
KIMAIYO took us to the Ogiek's ancestral territory, which lies in the Mao Forest watershed in Kenya's Central Highlands. The Ogiek were hunter-gatherers and honey collectors until their land rights were stripped away by colonial and post-colonial governments. Successive governments granted farming rights to outside communities and vast logging concessions to a handful of companies. Timber companies and immigrant farmers logged out indigenous forests, which eventually dried up this key wetland in the heart of the Mao. This wetland is the source of 7 major rivers, and its destruction caused severe problems downstream.
Mao was the largest indigenous forest in Eastern Africa. Now what has affected Mao, the climate change which has affected Mao, has affected a population of almost 15 million Kenyans who are now having failed crops. the livestock are not getting enough food. We have now diseases coming up, and of course all manner of conflicts that is being created by the competing of natural resources. 3 companies have been logging our forests. They are owned by people in the government. We feel betrayed. We actually feel targeted for our own conservation skills and for resisting the assimilation process which was started by the colonial authorities and perpetuated by the present regimes. If RED is a process that goes directly to the Ogiek community, then it will benefit the Ogiek. What those pushing RED should actually do, let them negotiate with the communities who have conservation interests, but not governments who have short-term plans, a vision of 5-year survival. Because regimes will change and money will be stolen, but the Ogiek are ready to conserve Mao free of charge. They'll offer their own skills free of charge.
Like the Ogiek, the Yaku of central Kenya were also forest hunter-gatherers. They lived in sacred ancestral caves in the Mukogodo forest. But commercial loggers, Maasai pastoralists, and Turkana charcoal burners moved into the Mukogodo and cleared vast tracts of forest. The Yaku were dispossessed and traditional hunting was outlawed. Today, the Yaku eke out an existence on the edge of their remaining ancestral forest home.
Inatata peye mekure tanaba togiting nati na kaye une yolo ko poki ajokore basi
mera gangara ya to lami e nyala na di mamuno di to ngana bo ken ata mena dana tiana ti ore na ba mulugo megure gya ta mugebe jo shida ta le lorki ne mota.
Where we were getting the food from the forest, the flowers, the honey, and what have you in the forest, we are not getting anymore because the drought has come and every life has changed. So that's why we are getting the hardship, especially.
Nago ko reta ta natim kedan katini na do ling amu anada magal dongani ta to dungol chani
na nigin to ka pe shugunyen timanga na pake nege to nya na pake nya ore sintai na obo no aye ne yo lo wele ti abar mo kodo entare te na yo ni yo lo yo ga da to na ngiti me ata de ga ni kibu atwa na timanga ge giti na anta obo no ngoru ki ma sai or mo kodo
anta saru yo kam ga gira awru yo kanati ni nyoro na sho yo kam ora na tim na egitu tenita ni yo ta na tim ana oshilo shi samaki liwa buta tu ankare ni nanga gende gweji
kware do pe ta bakini serikali ya Kenya ta ata na katar ku akle yaku ne sholope ne ake shukunyi teneningu tene nyitu lope nyita ata na katar lokwa.
Like the Yaku, Kenya's Ilchamus Maasai pastoralists are struggling with climate change and environmental degradation in the arid region around Lake Baringo in central Kenya.
In the last 2 years, we've not had the rain, and the few showers we've had has been so erratic that it can't be enough to sustain a crop or to maintain even the rivers. So it is really very bad. And if you go to Lake Baringo right now, there's no fish, the grass is very little, and the water is going down, very, very brown, because there's so much mud, because the forests have been cleared. So when it rains, the downpour just takes everything to the lake.
Even when you address the issues of climate change, climate warming, something like that, then you should also consider that it has affected us. We cannot even predict when we have rains. Because of this long drought, animals are dying and they continue dying. Many depend on relief food. There are also frequent conflicts over water and pasture because these things are becoming scarce.
The Ilchamus also face a huge problem with the exotic weed Prosopis juliflora, locally known as matanga, which was introduced by the UN FAO to stop desertification.
The intent was noble, but 20 years down the line, the weed has covered the entire landscape, choking indigenous trees and grasses. Thousands of animals died, hundreds of homesteads vacated. Change of river courses are questioning flooding
Ilchamus Plains. Lake Baringo ecosystem endangered. This weed has caused massive poverty among the Ilchamus, and the livelihoods are threatened.
Welcome, this is Lake Baringo, and this is the tree which is called Madenge. The problem of this tree can affect the goats of this area, and the goats come without teeth.
The big issue is whether communities like the Yaku, Ogiek and Samburu will see any real benefits from red and carbon credit trading.
The level of awareness of red among the communities is very, very low. All over, in all countries I've been to, communities are not aware about red. Even civil society groups themselves, not many, are aware about red. Even governments are not aware about red. Because of the low awareness, it will end up being implemented in a terrible way. We'll see more deaths, we'll see more suffering, we'll see more disorganization among communities. The consequences will be drastic. So it's time that people must actually stop talking and start working.
Red is barely known amongst Africa's forest-based and nomadic peoples. Yet red could become a catalyst, uniting governments with conservation agencies and indigenous peoples in conserving Africa's forests and fighting the effects of global warming. IPACC calls on African states to engage with their forest and nomadic communities. In doing this, they can link indigenous knowledge about adaptation and mitigation with science and technology, and so better the lives of all Africa's peoples. While the international debate drags on, the effects of climate change are now a matter of life and death for indigenous peoples like the Samburu.
The rich countries, they will also have to think, how will they restore the ozone layer and the global warming, reduce it? I don't know if they have a plan. Let them try and secure us. Really, 95% of our livestock are now under starvation. They are not dying. Maybe after these animals, we are thinking maybe we can follow because we don't have any other way of surviving. We have never experienced this. We are alive because of our domestic animals. No any other farm that we can dig. It's only this cow. Is this cow you eat meat? You milk? You take blood out of him? You drink the blood? That's our life. If all are finished, what shall we have to do? What will we do? What will you do? You die. And that's how it is. Because of all this long drought, their cattle are out, their goats are out, the donkeys. So now they are telling God, don't leave us.